everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I am Auron MacIntyre. So the New York Times has continued its incredible run of absurd articles. It started with, of course, voting is dangerous to democracy. Had quite the series of those, and now it's arrived at its inevitable conclusion, which is the Constitution is dangerous to democracy as well. It turns out that all democracy needs to do is obliterate everything about the United States that you know and love and care about to finally be secure, which really makes you wonder what the value of democracy is and what that actually means to these people. We'll dive into this article. I always think it's valuable to read into these because it makes some points that I think are important, not in the way that it hopes to, but I think by examining this, we can get a better understanding about what our current elite thinks about democracy, about rule of law, about the Constitution, about the way that things should be going forward. Before we get into all that, guys, let me tell you a little bit about today's sponsor. Universities today aren't just neglecting real education, they're actively undermining it, and we can't let them get away with it. America was made for an educated and engaged citizenry. The Intercollegiate Studies Institute is here to help. ISI offers programs and opportunities for conservative students across the country. ISI understands that conservatives and right-of-center students feel isolated on college campuses and that you're often fighting for your own reputation, dignity, and future. Through ISI, you can learn about what Russell Kirk called the permanent things, the philosophical and political teachings that shaped and made Western civilization great. ISI offers many opportunities to jumpstart your career. They have fellowships at some of the nation's top conservative publications like National Review, The American Conservative, and The College Thinker. If you're a graduate student, ISI offers funding opportunities to sponsor the next great generation of college professors. Through ISI, you can work with conservative thinkers who are making a difference. Thinkers like Chris Rufo, who currently has an ISI researcher helping him with his book. But perhaps most importantly, ISI offers college students a community of people that can help them grow. If you're a college student, ISI can help you start a student organization or a student newspaper or meet other like-minded students at their various conferences and events. ISI is here to educate the next generation of great Americans. To learn more, go to isi.org. That's isi.org. All right, let's dive right into our article today. It's the New York Times. The Constitution is sacred. Is it also dangerous? One of the biggest threats to America's politics might be the country's founding document. We're really just putting it all out there, huh, guys? We're just saying the quiet part out loud, screaming it really as much as we can. Let's see, begin with the article here. The United States Constitution is in trouble. After Donald Trump lost the 2020 election, he called for the termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution. So this is just a lie, actually. Just straight up first sentence, or second sentence here, is a complete lie. What Donald Trump said was that if you have electoral fraud, if you have voter fraud, if you have a massive fraud, then you're basically just terminating all the rules and regulations and articles of the Constitution, because the entirety of the Constitution is based on this idea that you have a procedure that grants legitimacy to the rule of the current leadership. So if you completely invalidate that ritual, if you completely invalidate or call into question the veracity of an election on a regular basis, you make it clear that the way that people vote doesn't really matter because ultimately the people in charge control the votes, they control what's being counted, they control what's happening. Well, then you've basically terminated all of the articles of the Constitution, all the rules of the Constitution, because you are completely manipulating the process that is supposed to regulate who is in charge. But that's not what the New York Times wants Trump to have said, so that's not what he said, and they just completely lie out front. Remember, however much you hate journalists, you don't hate them enough. Outraged critics denounced him by threatening a document that is supposed to be sacrosanct. We'll notice some scare quotes there. But announcing his desire to throw off the constitutional constraints in order to satisfy his personal ambitions, Trump was making his authoritarian inclinations abundantly clear. Again, that's not what happened. That's not what he did here. However, we can notice that by the fact that they put sacrosanct in scare quotes here, they are planning to do what they say Trump did. They are planning to announce that they would actually like to throw off the shackles of the Constitution. So yeah, Trump is scary, but ultimately maybe he had a point because we want to do it, right? It's no surprise then that liberals charge Trump with being a menace to the Constitution. But his presidency and the prospect of his re-election have also generated another very different argument, that Trump owes his political assent to the Constitution, making him the beneficiary of a document that is essentially anti-democratic, in this day and age, increasingly dysfunctional. So very interesting switch here. Trump is bad because he wanted to get rid of the Constitution, which he didn't, and we completely lied about and made up. However, we also want to get rid of the Constitution. In fact, actually, the Constitution is the problem. The Constitution is the whole reason that Trump even became president. Well, that's true of everyone. That's how the Constitution works. It's the set of rules by which people become president. That's how it lays out how the government is supposed to function. So all presidents have become president because the Constitution explains how someone becomes president. If that's your chain of logic here, we'll go deeper into this intellectually stimulating argument that they're putting together. After all, Trump became president in 2016 after losing the popular vote, but winning the Electoral College. Article 2. They're going to cite the articles so you can know that they really did their homework on how the Constitution works. Yes, the Electoral College is there to make sure that not only the largest populated states rule everything. If that was the case, then California, Texas, Florida, and New York would decide every presidential contest. So the Electoral College is there so that we actually distribute the responsibility for selecting a leader across the entire United States. It's not just the tyranny of a few states and their interests that rule the entire nation. He appointed 3 justices to the Supreme Court. Oh no! He used Article 3 of the Constitution to do the thing he's supposed to do by law. 2 of whom were confirmed by senators representing just 44% of the population. Article 1. Again, another problem. The Senate is a check on the democratic impulse, which it was always supposed to be. In fact, it was supposed to be much more of a check on the democratic impulse until the 17th Amendment allowed for the direct election of senators, which meant that no longer were senators a more aristocratic class chosen by state leadership representing the specific interests of the state, but instead were just filtered through the exact same mass democratic process. But whatever, that the fact that there's any vestige of resistance to complete and total raw democracy is the problem. Those 3 justices helped overturn Roe versus Wade, a reversal which most Americans disagreed with. What is omitted here is, of course, originally the Supreme Court instituted Roe versus Wade. It created a right in the Constitution to an abortion that had never existed before. We had to hear about the emanations of a penumbra. That was the actual language used to justify, a right to privacy was created in the Constitution, which apparently only really applies to abortion. And the majority of people at the time did not want this, which is why they had to do it through the courts. So the courts were fine when they created Roe versus Wade. And of course, this is the favorite part about all of these arguments. Back when the country was more conservative, back when the country was more right-wing, the fact that the Supreme Court suppressed the will of the majority and created these rights for the minority that wanted them, that was fine. That was good even. That was they were championed. They're heroes of democracy for doing this, I guess, even though it was anti-democratic. Now that the majority of people have, after many, many decades of being conditioned by the law, and guys, the law is a teacher. A lot of people like to say that Breitbart quote that culture or that politics is downstream from culture. That's wrong. Politics is, or culture is, largely downstream from power, which means law and influential institutions, on top of many other things. So after many decades of people living under Roe versus Wade, their opinion changed because they got used to that standard. But whatever, That's not what's important. We don't need to actually think about the history or the implications of any of this. The point is, the Supreme Court is a threat to what the Democrats want now. And so all they care about is now. They don't care about the past. They don't care that they use the Supreme Court to force through the entire civil rights revolution, to force through Roe versus Wade, to force through gay marriage. They don't care about any of that. They don't care that the Supreme Court was a specifically anti-democratic institution that they loved for decades because they used it to force top down these changes against the will of the majority. Now, today, since they think they have the majority advantage, all of a sudden, Supreme Court Constitution, very dangerous. The eminent legal scholar, Ermin Chemerinsky, maybe, worried about opinion polls showing a dramatic loss of faith in democracy. Oh, thank God, please. Yes, you should be losing faith in democracy. That if there's one thing you should be losing faith in, it is most assuredly democracy. He writes in a new book, No Democracy Lasts Forever. Again, God wills it. It is important for the Americans to see these failures that stem from the Constitution itself. So the problem, the Constitution was great when it was advancing left-wing principles, when it was advancing their political cause. Now that it's putting a slight hinder on, it's slightly hindering that which the radical left would like to advance, it's got to be abolished now. Him talking, some of his background here, we'll skip all that. We don't care. Talks about the tyranny of the minority. Yes. All right, let's see here. We'll begin on the next paragraph. In 1787, when 55 delegates convened in Philadelphia to revise the Articles of Confederation, that's an interesting way to say that they decided to overthrow the Articles illegitimately. They completely ignored the actual requirements in the Articles of Confederation to suspend them and install a new constitution. Instead, they just went ahead and ignored all procedures and rule of law and came up with a new governing document. But hey, why let that trip you up? They ended up embarking on a project that was much bigger in scope. As Americans are taught in history class, the delegates drafted a new document establishing a national government consisting of 3 branches: legislative, executive, and judicial, each functioning as a check on the others. The delegates were all white. Oh no, this country full of people who came from majority, the United Kingdom, what would be the United Kingdom today, they all happen to also be white. Like, this country full of Anglos was full of Anglos. So, everything they did must be legitimate, I guess, or illegitimate, I guess. But they nevertheless diverged on what seemed to be an intractable issue: slavery. Of course, this will be the only thing they care about in the Constitution is slavery, right? That's going to be it. This is going to be the whole reason. You have to corrupt the foundation of it. So you have to go back and say, like, well, actually, no, the problem isn't that, like, actually they skipped the steps in the Articles of Confederation or whatever. It's just, it's white people, and they were, the entire document is there to protect slavery. Though several states had already passed abolition status, nearly half the delegates were slaveholders. The Constitution was thus born of a compromise, with the enslavers getting the better end of the deal. To determine representation in the House and the Electoral College, 3/5 compromise allowed slave states to count 3/5 of every 5 people that were held in bondage, none of whom, needless to say, could vote, and the Fugitive Slave Clause stipulated that even when enslaved people escaped in free states, they would never be free. Now, this is far from the most important thing in the Constitution. This doesn't even have any relevance to the rest of their actual objections to the Constitution. They just put this in here to whine about racism. That's it. It's just here to say, well, the document was founded in the original sin and iniquity that can never be washed away, and so therefore it's tainted. They'll spend the rest of the time complaining about the fact that the Constitution protects us from wild and unmitigated democracy, but they needed to take the time to let us know that slavery was really bad. By the way, the 3/5 compromise is a protection against slavery. It made sure that the slave states could not count all of their slave population for the full count, could not have the full population. But whatever, none of those facts matter. None of that matters at all. It's all racist. It's all evil. They were white people after all. That was their greatest sin first, of course. And then they also wrote some document that the current the current New York Times editorial page is not a fan of. Such compromises meant that those who shared overlapping politics would still draw wildly different conclusions from the Constitution. Yeah, it turns out actually not everyone in the country immediately agreed on everything. Abolitionists considered the abolitionists, William Garrison, considered the compromise so damning to make the Constitution a covenant with death, an agreement with hell. Okay. But Frederick Douglass maintained the opposite, that slavery in the United States could only be upheld by claiming the Constitution does not mean what it says. As the historian James Oake put it, Douglass shared Abraham Lincoln's view, recognizing the Constitution as the promise of universal freedom. Except the left hates Abraham Lincoln now. Like they've gone back and they've looked about the fact that he was really not particularly interested in ending slavery in the Civil War. At least initially, that was not his goal. And his plan was to more or less send the freed slaves to Africa when they were done. That's Abraham Lincoln's plan. So, but he's convenient for the moment. They're pro Lincoln in this paragraph at least. I guess a promise of universal freedom, yes, but also instructions on how to thwart it. The Constitution, instruction manual on how to thwart freedom. These glaring discrepancies between the soaring words in the Constitution's preamble, "We the people," that is a seemingly ringing endorsement of popular governance. So the fact that they said "we the people," but they didn't immediately end slavery, I guess it invalidates the Constitution. As Cherminsky puts it, the distrust of democracy embedded in the rest of the document, reflecting the framers' inability to conceive of a future where women and black people could have a right to vote. So this is a very interesting sleight of hand here. Democracy is what we're aiming for in the leftist theory, I suppose, here. Just completely unfettered democracy, mob rule at all times. And so any restriction on democracy is specifically a restriction on women and black people. Now, obviously, these groups could not vote at the time, but even if they had been able to, the same restrictions on democracy would still exist, just with them as actual voting blocks, which, of course, happens today. Both of those groups can vote, and those restrictions do exist in the Constitution. But again, whatever. That's not the problem. The main thing is everybody is racist, and that's why the Constitution has to go. Originalism and its discontents. You might think that such disputes would have been laid to rest by a bloody civil war and Reconstruction amendments, which were outlawed slavery and granted all men the right to vote regardless of race. Why, yes, you would think that that would put this to rest. That was the whole point. That's why you fought the war. That's why you had the Reconstruction. That's why you passed the amendments, was for this to be put behind you. But of course, it is against the interest of the Democratic Party, of the left, to put any of this behind them, because the entire point is to bury us forever in this racial conflagration. Not to mention that the Constitution continued to change in the century after. Senators would be directly elected and women were granted the right to vote. Yes, so you've been stripping away all of these limitations on the franchise and all of these limitations on democracy repeatedly. But of course, that's not enough. That's insufficient. But for the last 50 years, why 50? The Constitution has appeared frozen in amber. That's an amazing thing. The last major amendment was in 1971, lowering the voting age to 18. So the last major amendment here is language, I guess, that just means amendments that only adjust or directly address the civil rights movement, right? So if a amendment does not increase democracy and reduce protections against mob rule, then it's just not a major amendment. And therefore, the Constitution has been frozen in amber, even though we did actually pass several amendments after that. In reaction to a landmark decision prohibiting segregation and bans on interracial marriage, conservative legal scholars began to champion judicial interpretations that rested on the framers' intentions 200 years before. All right, guys, we'll continue this article in just a minute. We'll also talk about the amendments, which is what I, for some reason, was trying to say. But before we do that, let's talk about job stacking. Hey, guys, let me tell you about today's sponsor, job stacking. More paychecks, less hustle, working from home. That's what job stacking is all about. If you're a remote or hybrid worker looking to maximize your earning potential, then consider joining the Job Stacking Mentorship Program. The program is designed by Ralph Haltza, the creator of Job Stacking, to help you successfully implement a strategy that will allow you to collect multiple paychecks from different jobs without burning out or getting caught by employers. Job stacking has already helped many people double or even triple their incomes. Luke Hill, a financial analyst living in the UK, has used job stacking to stack 3 different jobs and went from making $5K a month to $15K a month. But job stacking isn't just about increasing incomes. It's also about helping our guys gain more independence by no longer being a slave to debt or a single employer who hates their values. Andrew Gustafsson, a credit analyst from Australia, is now stacking 4 salaries, which he has used to pay off his personal and student debt and buy a home for his family. If you don't currently have a remote job, no worries. The program is also designed to help you land remote jobs so that you can go ahead and get started. So if you want to double your income and stop relying on a single paycheck from a woke employer, go to jobstacking.com/start now. That's jobstacking.com/start now and book a call with Rolf today. All right. So a very interesting contradiction that we're going to get to here yet again. And yeah, they can't keep the logic consistent even inside the article itself. So they complain that the Constitution has been frozen in amber for the last 50 years, which isn't true, but whatever. Again, immaterial. They did note that the Supreme Court had knocked down a lot of made a lot of rulings on things like segregation or laws against interracial marriage, these kind of things. But I remember 10 seconds ago when the Supreme Court was a problem, that the existence of the Supreme Court and its ability to restrain democracy or to make decisions against the democratic will of the people was a huge issue. Now it looks like we're once again pro the, inside the very same article, just a few paragraphs later, we're pro the Supreme Court overriding all of those, the will of the people, and being able to change all these things without any additional actual alterations to the Constitution, which has been busy being frozen in amber. So all these complaints about the Supreme Court and its ability to defy the democratic will of the people suddenly disappear when the Supreme Court was doing exactly what the left wanted. Originalists, as these scholars called themselves, say that they were simply reacting to the overreach by activist judges. All of this in scare quotes again. Liberal critics counter that the interpretation of law according to what the founders supposedly wanted amounts to an end run around the protecting and promoting of multiracial democracy. Okay, so again, multiple problems here. You just said that the Supreme Court is the end run around democracy, and that's a bad thing. But now when the Supreme Court is denying the will of the people and making these changes, you're in favor of these things that people are saying are overreaches and activism because they're winning you power. You don't care about the overreach. You don't care about the end run around democracy when it's doing your bidding. And very interestingly, the whole justification for ignoring what the founders wanted is multiracial democracy, right? That's all they cite. There's no moral argument here. There's no logical argument here. They're just saying, well, you can't think about what the founders wanted because the most important thing is multiracial democracy. When did we decide the most important thing was multiracial democracy? Was there a vote saying that multiracial democracy was the best thing? Did we put together a large moral case for this somewhere and understand it as a people and validate it? No. Did some authority from on high come down and issue? Do we get another set of commandments that tell us that multiracial democracy is the most important thing and it supersedes all other concerns and all other interests? No, very very specifically not. In fact, the founders were explicitly, in many cases, wary of democracy. But democracy is a magical word. And when we say democracy, it's the only thing that's good, even though that's not the intention of what the country is supposed to be. You might want to point to issues and say, well, the Constitution may have overestimated, the founders may have overestimated the ability of the people to understand that democracy was limited, specifically. Should have been more explicit about that. Should have been something that was held to, but whatever. All that aside, at no point did we uncover some tome that says, oh, actually, multiracial democracy is the be-all, end-all, the end moral goal of all action in the United States. And therefore, we can just go ahead and ignore anything and everything that the founders said previously, because ultimately, if it's not multiracial democracy, it just doesn't matter. That's the only value that we have. When people talk about the values and principles of the United States, that's all the left means. The attorney and columnist Madiba Denny argues that originalists' canny use of apologetic or apolitical language ensnares liberals into treating originalism as a coherent jurisprudence, even when it functions more like an ideology. So this is where we're going to get into. Actually, let me just read this last sentence, and then we'll get farther into this. Far from encouraging judicial restraint, she writes, the originalism trap. Originalism is more effective in restraining judges from doing good things. All right. So, there's a problem at the heart of this entire debate on originalism and all of these things. And the issue here is one that the left is not going to acknowledge, except when it advances their cause. But it is true in a sense. So the problem that they're pointing to is that originalism is an understanding about how one should read the Constitution. It's a hermeneutic for looking at what the Constitution says and how it should be understood, and saying, all right, we understand this document in the context of what the founders wanted, what the founders' intentions were. Now, it says here that they're calling for an apolitical language, and that is, it's creating a standard, and the standard is what the founders would have wanted. And this standard is supposed to be apolitical. It's supposed to be neutral in political grounds. We are simply referring to this authority, which is what the founders want. We're using the founders as basically the Bible, for understanding this. When you do that, it is, to be fair, not entirely apolitical, in the sense that nothing is apolitical when everything in the foundation is up for grabs. So simply by making the case that you should refer to the founders, that the founding matters, that the history matters, that the intent of the people who wrote the document matters, you are making a statement in current American politics, because current American politics hates the founders. It hates original America. It hates everything about our history. Everything about, the entire document or the entire article so far has been dedicated to invalidating the Constitution because it was written by white people who are racist, right? And so if white people are evil and they're all racist, and racism is the worst thing, and multiracial democracy is the only actual objective goal, which of course it isn't, that's itself is its own ideological goal, then what we really have here is a clash of worldviews. And neither of them can make an appeal to something neutral, because neither of them agree on a basis on which we could establish neutrality. There is no null hypothesis here. The founders believe this is not a null hypothesis to the left. It is the imposition of a political understanding and ideology. And multiracial democracy is not a null hypothesis to the right. It is not the default good, or at least it shouldn't be. Some people on the right have bought into this, but treating that as the ultimate goal is also not an understanding that the right agrees to. So there is no apolitical neutral ground to appeal to, ultimately. Back to the article here. It may be a measure of the current crisis, it may be a measure of the current crisis that even the conservative scholar Yuval Levin doesn't think originalism can remedy our constitutional woes. Originalism is by definition a preoccupation with what judges do. And the most urgent problem lies with the legislation that is, as he puts it, in American Covenant, underreactive. Members of Congress behave like performers or mere seekers of celebrity, neglecting to do the hard work of wielding the legislative power entrusted to them by the Constitution. So this is, of course, true that a large amount of the power that was vested in Congress in Article 1 has been given away. It has been given away to judges, and it has been given away to the executive bureaucracy. Again, something I talk about at length in my book, The Total State. So there is a certain amount of truth here that members of Congress are busy raising funds and raising their profile on Twitter, but very rarely passing any substantive legislation. And this is one of the most infuriating things I see from Republicans all the time. We see a bunch of Republican senators whining about Democrats and what they're doing and what the administration is doing and what the government is doing on Twitter. It's your job. It's literally your job to alter this. You are the legislative branch. You are the ones who should be able to decide that they cannot do this. You are the ones that can deny them funding. You are the ones that can make all kinds of radical changes to the law to fix these problems, and they just won't do it or can't do it. Is really the answer. In many cases, they recognize how impotent they have become in those positions. They don't really wield power. They wield the same amount of power I do, which is just to be able to go out and tweet about something. That's literally the most powerful thing they can do. There's a reason that so many of these people go into media the minute they're done with politics, or are often trying to cross their political career as media pundits, because they recognize that the actual power is in the media. The actual power is in altering minds through the media complex, as opposed to the legislation happening. It doesn't really matter what you could theoretically write a law about if you can't get it passed, if people aren't listening, if you can't change the minds of the people. And so many of them don't even bother with the actual legislative process. To anyone who thinks the Constitution has been tearing us apart, Levin exists that it can bring us together. He argues that precisely because the Constitution was a product of grudging and gradual compromise, it is especially valuable in our fractious times. The requirement of superjuries, which entails frustratingly narrow majorities, he says, is a good thing. Members of Congress are supposed to build coalitions, which tends to make partisans more tolerant and more tolerable. And there's a certain level of truth to this, right? Especially when your disagreements are relatively minor, building coalitions, forcing people to regularly compromise, does have a cooling tendency, right? However, as the differences have become more exacerbated, the legislative bodies are less interested in securing supermajorities through any kind of actual compromise, and instead are doing it by simply trying to manipulate elections, trying to make sure that they can just force things through. They want to reduce the ability of the other side to hinder any of their legislation, to have any constructive input. The fact that they're so far across from each other, the gap between these two positions is so wide, means that it's very difficult to come to any kind of real compromise on any given issue. Like, what are you going to be like? Well, you can kind of, mutilate the genitals of kids sometimes. Like, it's not really a place that you can compromise on. And so it's harder and harder to build those coalitions. It does, they ask. A lot of people looking at Congress today would be hard-pressed to find a glimmer of the tolerance Levin is so genially describing. Even he has to admit that Congress looks dysfunctional from every angle. But Levin's serene insistence that political frustration is healthy instead of corrosive may have something to do with the fact the Constitution's patchwork of compromises happens to align with his own brand of cautious conservatism. So the document is not a radical revolutionary document. The Constitution, while America was founded in a revolution, the Constitution was actually more of a reactionary compromise. It was a way to temper a lot of what had been done. It was, they were trying to mediate things like Shays' Rebellion and these other problems. It was a consolidation of power for sure. But ultimately, it's a document that wanted things to, change to take place slowly. But the left needs the change to take place at a revolutionary speed all the time. It's not okay for things to change slowly. It's not okay to let people adapt, which is itself its own problem. That is a major problem with conservatism. That I would point out is this general approach of saying, well, social revolution is fine as long as it happens at a slower pace, right? As Michael Malice says, conservatives are just progressives driving the speed limit. But the speed limit is the problem for these guys. The fact that there's a brake pedal at all is an issue. The only thing you're allowed to do is mash the accelerator to the floor. That is what it means to be an American in the year of our Lord 2024. Constant social revolution all the time. So to the extent to which the Constitution hinders that at all, it needs to go. He says the presidential candidate should vie for voters in the most competitive states, which tends to fall near the ideological middle, because it's good for both national unity and competitiveness of our politics. He singles out praise for the peculiar institution of the Electoral College. Yes, the whole point of the Electoral College is to force you to actually look at multiple states, and it means in many cases you have to debate issues in states that are down the middle, that are battleground states. So you can't just be radical one way or radical the other. It naturally calls for some level of compromise. The consequences of Constitution worship. The Electoral College, of course, is one of the bargains the framers made in order to reassure the slave states that they could keep their own peculiar institution. Of course. So, everything we don't like is actually there to protect slavery. That's every time they run into something that is keeping them from completely radically changing the United States, its origins can only be ones that were in justification for slavery, because that is the trump card. Anytime you say, yeah, but slavery, the racism, my racism is the argument. It defeats all other arguments in any confrontation. And sadly, this works on a pretty regular basis on conservatives. They tend to agree that is a trump card, unfortunately. Abolishing the Electoral College has become a popular refrain among liberals, something that the legal scholar Aziz Rana counts as one of the procedural specifics that consume discussions about the constitutional reform. In his bold new book, The Constitutional Bind, Rana argues against his tendency to take our problematic system as a given and then struggle to patch especially egregious leaks. Instead of focusing on the patchwork measure, he encourages us to think more expansively. So Aziz, traditional American name? Are these the traditions that he's looking at, or does he not care about revolutionizing these things because he's not particularly attached to the history of the United States? I don't know. Interestingly, we just need to destroy all of these. The system is problematic, and we just have to throw all of these things out of the boat. We can't think about how we might improve on them, what importance they might hold. Maybe people in the past, or people who are part of this tradition, the people who founded the tradition, might have an insight into something that we don't understand. Nope, they're white, they're racist, the slavery bad, therefore destroy all of those traditions. The bind he describes is familiar, if untenable. Americans who are justifiably disenchanted with the Constitution still cling to it in times of duress. These defenses implicitly suggest that Americans can only effectively protect their bedrock liberties from demagogues by redoubling their commitment to the text. So this is interesting. We want to have liberties. That's very important, right? This is what the left is all about. More liberties, more rights. More rights. There's civil rights everywhere. There's a right to everything. There's a right to prisoners getting sex changes in prison. There's a right to the state stealing children from their parents if they won't let them mutilate themselves. All these rights just exist in the Constitution, except maybe the Constitution is the problem. Maybe we should have all these rights free floating. We don't need a referential text that actually gathers together all the beliefs that define the country. Constitutional worship is so habitual that it's tempting to assume that the veneration was baked into our politics from the beginning. Verona situates it historically, showing how it flourished in the 20th century alongside the country's global ambitions. Even as the United States pursued imperial projects in places like the Philippines and tolerated racial terror in the Jim Crow South, the Constitution was offered as proof that the country was profoundly committed to liberty and equality. Its interests are coterminous with the world's interests. Very interesting, because the left wants to do exactly this, right? So, interestingly, the left wants to keep the world domination. Okay, I'm on board with saying maybe we should think twice about turning America into an empire. I'm pretty on board with saying that's a problem. I'm even on board with saying, hey, maybe using the Constitution as the George W. Bush. Oh, we just spread democracy everywhere, right? We just every country has a George Washington and an Alexander Hamilton and a Thomas Jefferson hiding out in a cave somewhere in Afghanistan or Iraq, and all we have to do is sprinkle a little America on them. Just give them a constitution like the United States and solve the problem. Okay, I'm on board with understanding that. But you notice that the left will be like, oh, well, we shouldn't do the imperial project, except actually we should continue exactly that. NATO should exist. NATO should control the entire world. The United States should regime change any place that isn't bought into the kind of the rainbow mafia. We have to go fight wars in the Middle East to make sure that trans lesbian children can exist in, I don't know, Iran. So they want to keep the part about world domination and constant rights and revolutions. They just want to free it from the shackles of the Constitution. They just want to go ahead and discard entirely the document in which all of that was founded, all of that was understood, in theory, because really they're twisting it all into these new rights, the ones that certainly weren't built in the Constitution. So we need to jettison the document, but keep the imperialism, keep the world domination. Originalism has gathered strength by tapping into this reverence, deploying the authority of the framers in order to pass off originalist interpretations as the epitome of restraint and objectivity. Rana notes that originalism has allowed conservatives to undermine progressive policies while using soothing language of constitutionalism. All right, so either there is an objective standard one can appeal to, at least objective inside the tradition of the United States, or there isn't. I'm not saying there's an international objective standard here. I have a lot to say about that, and this isn't the episode to do it in. But either there is a tradition we can appeal to that allows us to understand our identity and our values and our way of life, or there isn't. Now, the left doesn't believe there is. So it says, oh, well, no, originalism is trying to appeal to some kind of objective reference point, but we reject that because really the most important thing, like you see here, the problem, you notice there's no argument against appealing to the founders other than they were racist and that progressive policies and multiracial democracy are the actual goal. Again, when did those become the goal? When did those become the primary driver? Could the nature of the American tradition itself deny the ascension of progressive policies and the elevation of multiracial democracy to the place of primacy all by itself? Well, no, because those are the things that the left cares about. So we can just discard anything that the framers would have cared about, right? Ultimately, according to this line of argument, the damages of constitutional worship extend to the structures of the political system itself. National politics gets increasingly funneled through the judiciary, which control of the courts, especially the Supreme Court, becomes a way to consolidate power regardless of what the majority of people want. Again, Republicans were making this argument forever. The right was making this argument forever that you are getting rid of this, that you are creating this scenario where control of the Supreme Court is the only thing that matters. And when the left had generational control of the Supreme Court, they did not care. In fact, they said this is a feature, not a bug. That the fact that the Supreme Court can smack down democracy, can smack down the will of the people, that's what we want. That's what's just. That's what matters. As long as it's it's pushing the progressive revolution, the Supreme Court, and the fact that all politics was being funneled into the Supreme Court was a free ride for the left. They didn't really have to worry ultimately about winning the election because they knew they could always take it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court would functionally rewrite the law to make it progressive, to meet the progressive goal. And now that actually it may look like there is a multi-generational conservative Supreme Court in a rare win for conservatives, and credit to the pro-lifers, because not only did the pro-life movement achieve its goals, but more importantly, its goals achieved a multi-generational win for conservatives for a very long time, because they recognized that institutions made this policy and not democracy. And so they went out of their way to ensure that they would win in the game of the Supreme Court, in the institutional game, and stopped focusing so much on democratic politics. And that was great. I mean, you still had to win Democratic contests in order to appoint these justices, but they understand that long term, actually controlling the institution was far more important than winning any individual election or even forwarding any specific piece of legislation. And now that they figured out that game, the left hates it and they're willing to abandon it. This disempowerment of majorities, which, the whole point. This disempowerment of majorities, combined with a political gridlock and institutional paralysis outside of judiciary, fuels popular disaffection. I thought the left hated populism. I thought populism was a problem. I thought the populism that swept Donald Trump into office was a problem. But of course it's not, when they think that populism, the popular opinion, is on their side. The document that's supposed to be a bulwark against authoritarianism can end up fostering the widespread cynicism that helps authoritarianism grow. So they don't know what the word authoritarianism means here, or they don't care. It's probably the latter. Authoritarianism would mean that the rule of law, the procedures, are being ignored. But of course, the left is the ones that would like to get rid of the rule of law. They're the ones who are trying to destroy rule of law. Also, yes, the Constitution was specifically designed to prevent the constant rule of the majority. That is the whole point, was that actually you shouldn't just be able to get 51% of people together and they radically and revolutionize the country. That is not what you're supposed to do, but that's what the left wants to do, so we need to go ahead and destroy any barriers to that. Rana says that the urge to seek salvation in the Constitution has been stunted not only our political behavior, but also our understanding of what is possible. Yes, that is the problem, that the Constitution limits what progressives can do. So the Constitution has been stunting our political behavior in the sense that we could go even further left. It's also limiting our understanding of what's possible in the sense that we could become even more communist. We could become gay race communism could control everything, and so we need to throw off the shackles of the Constitution. Now, America tends to overlook the possibilities of mass democratic politics precisely for this reason. We succumb to the conventional wisdom of constitutional worship, thinking that political progress is a matter of adhering even more perfectly to the essence of the document, when the building of majorities is invariably a more complicated process. So America has like a teleology, like it has a specific endpoint. They're like, we are trying to become a more perfect in the sense that we are trying to pursue a specific goal, a specific understanding, a specific way of being that is immortalized in the Constitution. Now, I want to take a second, because there's a lot of people who are going to say, Auron, you have a problem with Constitution worship, and you're right. So, my problem, and there's a small amount of overlap here, which I'll acknowledge before going into where we differ very wildly. My problem is that conservatives also look at the Constitution and say the purpose of the United States is the Constitution. The Constitution is some piece of political technology, and if we just adhere to the Constitution more closely, then this solves all of our problems. The Constitution, it doesn't matter what the people do. It doesn't matter what the people believe. It doesn't matter how many people we admit into this country that don't care about it, want to destroy it, have no allegiance to it. None of that matters, because the Constitution, the words as written, the procedures inscribed therein, they all by themselves limit the government forever. That is not the case. It's obviously not the case. You just had to live through 2020 to know that's not the case. Now, a lot of people hear me say that, and they think, oh, well, that means that Auron doesn't like the Constitution. He doesn't think the Constitution matters. The Constitution is just some worthless piece of paper. No, wrong. Bad understanding. That is not what I'm saying. Constitution is not a worthless piece of paper. Sorry, it's not. The Constitution is a formalization, just writing down what the founders believed, what the people of the United States believed, what the actual folkways and the American tradition was at the time. Now, that snapshot matters because it lets us know what they were thinking, what they were feeling. You can go a lot deeper into that. I encourage people actually to read the Federalist Papers. Nobody does this. Federalist Papers are there for you. They're not that hard to understand. You can read a Federalist paper on the toilet half the time, so it's not like it's a huge commitment to make your way through the Federalist Papers. And you can actually understand what the founders were thinking at the time. Now, traditions, if done properly, have to deal with the current day. And that's the problem that conservatives have. That's actually my problem with originalism itself. I'm also not a fan of originalism, not because I don't think we should be looking at what the founders meant. I think we should. I think that matters. I think it matters what the American tradition was. But the problem with many conservatives and many originalists is and the problem with some of the Constitution worship is they treat the tradition as a dead thing, a thing that was captured on a piece of paper at some point, and therefore it never changes, that nothing matter. You don't have to worry because it's locked in there. But the Constitution does not actually guarantee you anything. The Constitution doesn't do anything on its own. It's simply a list. It's simply a manual for how this should run, and a inculcation or a instantiation of the way of being of the people, their political traditions and their understanding at the founding of the United States. In order to keep that tradition alive, in order to honor that heritage, we have to actually live it. We have to actually believe it. We have to animate it. It has to be part of our daily life, and it has to be continuously practiced. And if it's continuously practiced over time, some changes will take place. And this is ultimately where the left is correct about something about the Constitution. Constitution is a living document in the sense that constitutions don't just get frozen, that constitutions are ultimately reflections of the way of being of the people. And if the way of being of the people, if the spirit, if the beliefs, if the history and tradition and moral understanding, the religion of the people wildly differentiates from the words written on the paper, then the words of the paper will not themselves save you. And as we can see with the left in this very article, calls to say, the originalists called to say, actually, we should appeal to the beliefs of the founders. The beliefs of the founders matter, fall on deaf ears because the left has no shared tradition. They have no shared understanding. They do not agree with you. As this article points out repeatedly, they don't hold the founders as a foundational bedrock. They don't honor the political traditions of the United States. These are bad things. These people were white. They were racist. And those are just the worst things that can ever be. And the real goal is not anything that the founders believed in, and it's not anything that the founders wrote down. The real goal is multiracial democracy that allows for a perpetual, progressive, left-wing revolution. That is the actual goal for them. And so all the appeals to originalism and all the appeals to a shared tradition and all the appeals to the words on the paper of the Constitution mean nothing to them because they do not care. And they tell you specifically that they don't care. In fact, they care so little that jettisoning everything about the Constitution, all of its institutions, all of its restraint on democracy, all of its wisdom about prudence and the application of carefully and slowly introducing change if you introduce it all of that needs to be thrown out the window because it's impeding the global revolution towards progressive utopia. That's the problem. So yes, I do agree that constitutional worship is a problem, but not in the sense that the Constitution is bad or the Constitution should be discarded or the Constitution is a worthless piece of paper. No, that is not my point. My point is the Constitution does matter because it reflects the way that the founders understood our political traditions and the United States. However, those things do have to be lived. It's not enough to simply look back at them 200 years ago and be like, it's nice. There it is sitting in a case somewhere. It's protecting us. Like the emperor, like Warhammer 40K and the emperor sitting on his golden throne. It just protects us no matter what. No, it actually has to be put into action. And when it's put into action, it will look different today. The tradition will slightly change. It will slightly alter slowly over time. It will have different applications over time. But if you simply treat it as this document that is just preserved forever in this specific instance and will always protect us, well, obviously that can't be the case if the people diverge radically from the document itself. And that's the place where we are, where appeals to constitutionalism mean nothing to the left. And so you can sit there and make all the originalist arguments you want. You can make all the arguments about the founding fathers you want. You can appeal to all of the traditions of the United States you want. The left doesn't care. They are not interested. They are not interested. Reddit says the urge to seek the salvation of the Constitution has, oh yes, I already read this part. America tend to overlook the possibilities, blah, blah, blah. We get through all this. We succumb to the conventional wisdom, worship, the essence of the document. But such complaints are often why we have held fast to the Constitution for a long time. It offered a shared language that we, when we couldn't agree on much else. Yes, sadly, that was the ultimate problem. Is the Constitution became the only thing that Americans could share. But that's not how constitutions are supposed to work. Americans are supposed to share a culture, share a belief, share a bedrock understanding, and the Constitution reflects that. The problem for many conservatives is that they invert this causality, right? They think, well, we can be as radically different as we want as long as the Constitution is there to agree on. But that's not how it works. You are not radically different. You share a moral vision. You share a goal. You share an understanding of how the country is supposed to work and what you believe in, what your tradition is. And because you hold that tradition, you then have a constitution that reflects that. There are plenty of countries that don't have a written constitution. We could debate the merits or problems of a written constitution. The point being is that a constitution is not just a piece of paper. It's not just a technical manual, though sometimes it is that. But it is the reflection of the understanding and traditions of the people. You cannot have the people radically alter from those, radically abandon those, and then expect the piece of paper itself to hold back the revolution that the left is trying to create. The historian Linda Colley, who has written critically about the connection between the Constitution across the world and imperial expansion, nevertheless concludes that such frail paper creations of value human beings can inscribe expectations that governments are at least supposed to live up to, providing something of value even when violated. In a deeply uncertain, shifting, unequal, and violent world, Colley writes, The Gun, the Ship, and the Pen. I guess that's the book, In the Gun, the Ship, and the Pen. Such documents may be the best we can hope for. Americans aren't alone in treating a constitution as a source of inspiration. Colley cites Olga Misk, a young pro-democracy activist in Moscow, who in 2019 stood in the street surrounded by formidable men in body armor, reading aloud passages from the Russian Constitution. Police officers recognized the text from where she was reading, and they did not move in to attack. So saying, yeah, no, I guess constitutions can be a rallying point. And then to just talk some more about the book. So yeah, ultimately what we see here is that, there are some valid points about constitutional worship in the sense of assuming that the Constitution can do the work that we have to do culturally. But the left here is calling for an abandonment of the Constitution, not because they see constitution worship as like a restriction on the tradition, and ultimately we should really live that tradition out every day, and we should make it part of our lives. And that's the problem with constitutional worship. Their problem with constitutional worship is that America has a tradition at all. Their point is not one of order of operations. Their point is not one of saying, well, we should be more faithful to the tradition, and our worship of the parchment itself keeps us from being faithful to the tradition. Their point is we should just discard the tradition entirely. The tradition is bad. White people, racists, it was all created to protect slavery. Multiracial democracy is the only thing that matters. Progressive revolution is the only thing that matters. And to the extent where the Supreme Court and the Constitution were useful to forward those things, we supported them, but now they're not useful anymore, so we should get rid of them. Ultimately, that's the goal. Those are the goals we've decided, and if the Constitution inhibits the progress in those directions in any way, it needs to go. And that's really why we continually see things like, the New York Times saying, well, democracy or the elections are bad for democracy, Constitution is bad for the United States. Because ultimately what they're trying to do is say, well, democracy is really just our understanding of left-wing revolution. It's our power. When we say our democracy, we mean our power. The left should have the ability to pump their message through the media, import as many new voters as they want, game the system as much as possible, generate a majority, and then validate all actions that they want to take at any moment. And to the degree which the Constitution hinders any of that, it's an issue, right? All right, guys, let's head over to the questions of the people real quick. Tiny Stupid Demon says, I sense we have reached the point where there's not even bothering to put on the skin suit anymore. Yeah, they're really not even bothering to wear the institution like a skin suit. That's right. They are now done pretending that they even need the institution. This is the same thing that happened with Christianity when it comes to wokeness, right? Wokeness is most definitely a Christian heresy. It is trying to take Christian principles and completely divorce them from biblical truth, from Christ, from their grounding in reality, their grounding in the ultimate truth, and completely disembody them so they can be manipulated and create the world that the left wants to make. They want to take those things and use them to completely remake the world in their image. Same thing here, right? The Constitution was useful to the extent where it allowed them to do the things they want to do when they could use the Supreme Court to ram through and manipulate things. That was useful. But now that it's a problem or a hindrance, so the right has figured out the game, the most important thing to do is to just throw that skin suit aside. We're done with the institution. We're done with the shackles. We're done with tying this to anything, any actual tradition. We're completely disembodied, and the revolution is the only thing that really matters. We're done with the pretense of tying this to any core values of the United States. We're just going to call the United States evil. We're just going to call it racist. We're just going to denigrate white people. Everything about the United States is founded in slavery. That's all that matters. 1619 Project all the way through. Tiny Stupid Demon follows up with, the correct sequence is politics, kayfabe, is downstream from culture. Culture is downstream from power, actual power. Power is downstream of nature or God. Again, I think that there's I think they're reducing things to, politics is just culture, or culture is just politics, or it's all just power, is a problem. These things matter, and we should look at the connections that they have, but there is a more complicated relationship. There is a little bit more of a back and forth here. Ultimately, I think power matters a lot more than conservatives understand. And because they don't get that, they thought that culture was this organic thing that was altering their politics, but that's not the case either. So it's a little more complicated than maybe one slogan lets us understand. But ultimately, I think a lot of the things that you're saying there are correct. Let's see here. Wolfbane says, politics is downstream from culture. Culture is not downstream from one river, but the intersection of three rivers: philosophy, education, and generational experience. And that's true to some extent. I think there's a couple more rivers there, though, that you have the problem with. We're assuming there that all culture is organic, and some culture is organic, but especially with the mass man and mass information propaganda, actually culture is highly influenced by a lot of straight propaganda, media, social media. These things are wielded, even financial incentives can heavily alter culture. Again, all of these things interact. It's not just one way. It's not a one-way flow. It's not a monocausal explanation. But all of those things that you're talking about do matter, and those things are all heavily influential when it comes to formation of culture. However, I think while those things, you left out religion, maybe you're folding it under philosophy. I think that itself is also more of a problem. A lot more to say about this. I'll probably try to do more episodes expanding on this, because I think we should probably better understand the more of a spiderweb configuration here that we have, rather than just one direction or one source for all of these changes. But the points you're making are all relatively true there. Let's see. Tom, sorry guys, this is a little small today. I need to fix this, so I'm having a little trouble reading it because I'm an old man. Thomas Monascuris, maybe. Sorry if I got that wrong. We haven't found a way around the fact that the majority believes whatever the oligarchs pay them to believe. That undermines democracy. Yeah, and you never will. The problem with democracy in the age of the mass man is that the oligarchs will always manipulate what the masses believe. Again, I lay this out in my book, The Total State, in much more thorough detail. But Gaetano Mosca makes an excellent point about how the United States became an oligarchy. And his point is that every one of our institutions, all those evil branches and separation of powers that the left hates so much, they were predicated on the idea that power came from different parts of society, that there are different social spheres, Some of them are aristocratic, some of them are mercantile, some of them are the peasantry, some of them are religious in nature. All of these things check and balance each other and kind of limit things to some extent because the power comes from different areas. But once you turn all of these branches and all of these institutions into things that are simply dictated by democracy, then oligarchs and their ability to manipulate information through the media end up ruling the day, which is why the left wants to destroy all of these things, because that is what they are counting on. They control the media, they control academia, they control the consensus-making apparatus, and therefore they want to get rid of all other forms of limitation, all other social spheres. The only authority rests in democracy, multiracial democracy, apparently most importantly, to the point where you're allowed to disassemble everything about the traditions or heritage or understanding of the past in the United States, because ultimately the only thing that's allowed to influence any politics is mass democracy. Let's see here. Roman Hank, I see I've triggered a 40K nerd out here with this reference. The Zinch strategy, Gene Stealer tactics, Slanesh ambitions, enter the institutions, delicately synthesize it into a tool for their aims. Yes, they have the ability to hide amongst the population and corrupt them. That's not going to make a lot of sense to people who have never nerded out on Warhammer 40K, but I get what you're saying, man. Thank you. And then Perspicacious Heretic says, I don't get why people speed. The speed limit is written on the sign. Fantastic point. Very well said. Yes, the most powerful conservative argument. We've written it down somewhere, therefore no one can break it. And somehow that still seems to be the majority of conservative commentary. Oh, look, it's written down in the Constitution. I've got it right here. It's on the speed limit sign, as you point out there. No, you actually have to care. That you have to care about the reason that the rules are enforced, the reason that the tradition existed. If you don't, then as we see in this article, the left just spends all its time saying, well, everyone who wrote this down was a racist, sexist, they were all white, and so their opinions simply don't matter and they can be discarded. All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you, everybody, for coming by. Always appreciate you watching. If it's your first time on this channel, make sure that you go ahead, subscribe, click the bell, notification, all that stuff to let YouTube know you actually want to watch the channels that you are subscribed to. If you would like to get these broadcasts as podcasts, make sure that you subscribe to the Auron MacIntyre Show on your favorite podcast platform. That way, when you are working out, mowing the lawn, doing your chores, you can listen to this. And if you do subscribe, make sure to leave a rating or review. Also, if you'd like to pick up my book, The Total State, you can do that on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. Anywhere fine books are sold, you should be able to pick it up or order it there. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And as always, I will talk to you next time.